Okay, so in this video, this is an updated version of my lipids information for general biology. So let's go ahead and talk about lipids. Now, generally, the majority of lipids on Earth are fats. And so, let's go ahead and talk about their characteristics. So lipids are generally waxy, greasy, oily, and they do not mix with water. So they repel water. Now, in science, we call this hydrophobic, which literally translates into the fear of water. And so another word, though, that can be used is nonpolar, which is more of a chemistry term. So if you are like in 9th grade biology and you haven't taken chemistry yet, it's okay if you're not familiar with nonpolar, but we can understand hydrophobic means water fearing, and they repel water. Okay, so lipids have three major purposes that we talk about in a biology class. And so one of them is that they're long-term energy storage. They compose the cell membrane in the form of phospholipids, and they're important parts that we use for cell communication. So we have our steroid, gosh, I'm trying to go back. There we go. We have steroid-based hormones that are used for communication and gene expression. So a lot of our sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, are steroids. And molecules like cholesterol are also a lipid. They're sterol. And so we also have a few other functions that are just cool examples of why lipids are important. We have the fact that they waterproof plants and animals. We see that they provide insulation, especially in our endotherms, our warm-blooded organisms that live in cold environments. And they're also important fat-soluble vitamins that can be stored long-term in our fat cells. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the three main types of lipids that we'll study this year. So we have triglycerides, which are our long-term energy storage. And when I have a slide next that will talk about where that energy is actually stored in a lipid. And then we have phospholipids that compose our cell membranes, along with proteins and carbohydrates. Then we have our sterols, and sterols, for example, cholesterol, it's in the name, cholesterol, is the backbone for forming our sex hormones like estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. We also have cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And so we have sterols. So these are our three main types of lipids. And generally speaking, they are hydrophobic or nonpolar and repel water. So we also will notice that our lipids are made, are made of three main elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But I think I have that later on. So here, let's start with a triglyceride. So a triglyceride has a few parts. It has a glycerol and three fatty acids. So that glycerol is a 3-carbon molecule that, super cool, when we use our triglycerides for energy, our cells are actually able to take one glycerol and another glycerol that each have 3 carbons and actually turn them into glucose, join them together. It's called gluconeogenesis. And so we can use our fat to either build glucose or directly break down our fatty acids in the Krebs cycle for energy. So there's our glycerol, a 3-carbon molecule. And then we have our fatty acids that are a chain of hydrocarbons. So a chain of carbons with hydrogens attached. All right. So here we go. When we talk about, though, where is the energy found in triglycerides? Really, it's going to be these fatty acids. And so if you've already studied cellular respiration, you know that an important part of producing our energy in the mitochondria is that we rely on hydrogens and electrons. And so these fatty acids have a very large amount of hydrogens and electrons, which are two critical features of making energy in our cells. So the fact that we can tightly pack together a lot of hydrogens and electrons, we have a lot of stored potential energy in these fatty acid molecules. And so just looking at this triglyceride, though, we can see that the main elements here are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So, and I've already mentioned that the fatty acids are hydrocarbons, which are a chain of hydrogens and carbons. And it's these fatty acids that are the reason that they're nonpolar, are hydrophobic. Nonpolar means that all of the electrons are shared equally. And so in these hydrocarbons, all of those bonds, the electrons are all being shared equally. And that's not true in water molecules. And therefore, they repel each other. And so to summarize, triglycerides are a fantastic long-term energy storage molecule because of all of the electrons being stored in the bonds between carbons and hydrogens. And so when we break these down in aerobic respiration, we're harnessing the electrons and the hydrogens from these fatty acids in order to power our mitochondria. Okay. Now, there are two types of fatty acids. We have saturated fatty acids that are straight chains. They are full of hydrogens and full of single bonds. Now, that because they are such straight chains of fatty acids, they're able to pack really closely together, and that allows them to be solid at room temperature. Then you have your unsaturated fatty acids, and your unsaturated fatty acids have at least one double bond between some carbons, and therefore they have kinks or bends in their fatty acid chains, and that enables them to be liquid at room temperature, like your olive oils. So if I look at this chain here, these are two fatty acids. We see that fatty acid option A, is unsaturated because of that double bond. So if we look here, we can see that the top two fatty acids are saturated, whereas the bottom one is unsaturated on this triglyceride. Now, again, to summarize, we see that lipids are produced or made from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So when a plant does photosynthesis, it is going to use its major building blocks of carbon dioxide and water, and then rearrange the molecules after photosynthesis has happened to produce our triglycerides. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about phospholipids now. So phospholipids, we will have a whole unit on cell membranes separate from this. So just basically, this molecule here is a phospholipid. It has a phosphate group head that is polar and is attracted to water, and two fatty acid tails that are nonpolar or hydrophobic. So previously, the triglyceride, tri meaning three, had three fatty acid tails, where this phospholipid has just two. But they can either be saturated or unsaturated, and they repel water. And so therefore, because cells are like surrounded in water on the outside, and their cytoplasm is mainly water as well, you have two layers of phospholipids with the tails repelling that water and facing each other. So our cell membranes are made of two layers of phospholipids. Okay. We also have some cholesterol within the membrane because cholesterol is nonpolar and a lipid, and so it repels water as well. So the function of this cholesterol and these proteins and these lipids will be discussed in a different video. Okay, and then our last example, we had sterols. So I'm going to use, because it's biology class, cell communication is really important. So we actually will use our steroid hormones as a major part of how our cells communicate. So testosterone is an example of a steroid hormone, and because it's a lipid, it's able to diffuse right through that lipid bilayer made of phospholipids and attach to its receptor inside the cell. Now together, this testosterone and this protein are going to go and turn on or turn off your genes and influence gene expression. And so this wraps up our summary on lipids, and great job.